It's strange how a single sentence can erase an entire lifetime. For 38 years, I thought I knew exactly who I was. Nathan Bridgewater, the son of a factory worker, the brother who always showed up, the man who sent money home every month. I believed my story was ordinary, a hard-working family trying to make it through the rust and grit of Cleveland's industrial district. But on a cold, rainy Tuesday in March, everything I knew about myself, every memory, every truth I'd ever held must collapsed in an instant. My mother, Dorothy Bridgewater, lay dying in a hospital bed at Cleveland General. Her body was frail, eaten away by cancer, the smell of antiseptic heavy in the room. The heart monitor beeped softly, a rhythm I'd been listening to for weeks. My brother Dennis leaned by the window, glued to his phone. My sister Marlene sat in the corner, filing her nails, pretending she wasn't waiting for our mother to die. Then, something changed. Dorothy's eyes snapped open. For the first time in weeks, there was clarity. A strange, sharp awareness. Her bony hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice thin but fierce. "I need to tell you something before I go." I leaned closer, thinking she wanted comfort. But what came out next didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like confession. "You're not my son." The words froze me. I thought it was the morphine talking. I tried to call for a nurse, but her grip tightened. "Listen to me!" she said louder now. Loud enough that Dennis looked up and Marlene's file stopped midair. Her next words shattered the world. "I stole you. From a billionaire's family. In 1985. She took a breath that rattled in her chest. "Your real name is Christopher Rothwell. Your father owns half of Manhattan." The heart monitor quickened, then slowed. And 20 minutes later, Dorothy Bridgewater, the only mother I'd ever known, was gone. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hostile. Dennis crossed the room, his boots heavy on the tile, and slammed me against the wall. "I always knew something was wrong with you," he snarled, grease-stained fingers twisting my collar. 38 years pretending to be our brother, and you didn't even know it." Marlene stood up slowly, her grocery store name tag still pinned to her chest. "No wonder she looked at you different," she said coldly. "It wasn't love. It was guilt. Pure guilt for what she'd done. They threw me out before Dorothy's body was even cold." Dennis grabbed my wallet, ripped out the $300 I'd brought for funeral costs, and sneered, "Consider it payment for 38 years of freeloading." I walked out into the rain that night, alone. The days that followed bled together. I ended up in a shelter near Burke Lakefront, surrounded by the hum of broken heaters and the stench of wet concrete. For 3 months, I drifted through half jobs and sleepless nights, replaying those words over and over. "You're not my son." Nathan Bridgewater had never existed, and Christopher Rothwell, he was a ghost, a name from a missing persons case that the world had long forgotten. Then one gray afternoon, as I stood in the food line, 2 men in black coats approached me. "Mr. Bridgewater?" one asked. I nodded cautiously. The taller man extended a hand. "Roger Blackstone, private investigator." The other opened a briefcase. "Anthony Corll, estate attorney." They'd been searching for me ever since Dorothy's confession had made a small blip in the local newspaper. Blackstone slid a document toward me, a DNA test. They'd run it from a coffee cup I'd thrown away at the shelter. "Your biological father," he said, "is Sterling Rothwell. He owns 43 commercial properties in Manhattan, estimated worth $2.4 billion. My knees nearly gave out. He wasn't done. He's been searching for you since 1985. He never believed you were dead." Then Corll pulled a folded paper from his briefcase, a will. My name was on it. Not Nathan Bridgewater. Christopher Sterling Rothwell III. "He's dying," Corll said softly. "He wants to see his son before it's too late." But then Blackstone spoke again. 7 words that made my blood run cold. Dorothy Bridgewater was Sterling's biological sister. My mother wasn't just my kidnapper. She was my aunt, a woman who'd watched her brother build an empire while she lived in poverty, a woman who decided that if she couldn't share his fortune, she'd take his son. For 38 years, she raised me as her own. Not out of love, but out of vengeance. And I never suspected a thing. The rain that began the day she died still hadn't stopped. It was as if the sky itself couldn't wash away the filth of her secret. When I was a kid, I thought our street on Stockton Avenue was the whole world. 2 abandoned warehouses on either side, the smell of rust in the air, and a duplex where the walls peeled like old paint. But it was home. My father, or the man I thought was my father, Harold Bridgewater, was built like a refrigerator. 6'3", hands like iron, skin dusted with steel grit he could never scrub off. He used to say, "Hard work makes an honest man." He'd ruffle my hair and grin, even when he came home too tired to eat. When he died, crushed under. A crane load gone wrong. The company sent a check for $20,000 and a letter saying they weren't liable. That was Cleveland justice. Dorothy aged overnight. Her back hunched, her hands shook, and she spent long nights at the kitchen table counting every penny. Dennis became man of the house at 18, which mostly meant drinking Harold's. Leftover beer and yelling at me for reading instead of working. "Books won't put food on the table," he'd say. He was Harold's son through and through, quick to anger, slow to forgive. Marlene was 12 then, sharp, clever, and already hard. She counted every dollar that came through the door, memorized prices at the grocery store, and lied about her age to get a job bagging groceries at 14. But me? I was different. Where they had Harold's brown eyes and broad faces, I had green eyes. Dorothy said they came from somewhere back in the family line. I was leaner, quieter, and sharper. When the electric company made a mistake on our bill, I caught it and saved us $80 we couldn't spare. "Nathan's the smart one," Dorothy would say. But she never looked at me when she said it. It was like she was seeing someone else behind my face. After Harold died, her drinking got worse. Sometimes, after a few glasses of cheap wine, she'd touch my face and whisper, "You look just like..." Then she'd stop. "Your grandfather," she'd finish, though her eyes said something else entirely. By the time I turned 18, I was the family accountant. Every Sunday I sat at that chipped kitchen table with Dorothy's checkbook, calculating which bills we could delay and which ones might get us cut off. Dennis called me Mr. Fancy Hands. Marlene called me Mom's favorite. But there was never love in Dorothy's tone, only fear, like she was caring for a porcelain doll she didn't deserve to own. I never left Cleveland, never went to college. I worked at the Thurman Distribution Center for 15 years, climbing from loader to supervisor. Steady pay. Modest life. Every month I sent $500 home. Dorothy always said the same words. "You're a good son," but her eyes never agreed. When she got sick, I was the only one who showed up. I drove her to every appointment, sat beside her while poison dripped into her veins. Dennis was too busy at the shop. Marlene couldn't risk her manager position, so it was me, always me, waiting in those white rooms that smelled of death and disinfectant, and maybe that's why her confession cut so deep, because I'd earned the right to be her son. But I never truly was. The morning she died, the doctor warned us it wouldn't be long. Dennis was fuming about missing work. Marlene kept scrolling on her phone, and I sat there watching Dorothy's chest rise and fall, wondering why the grief I felt didn't make sense. When her eyes opened, when she grabbed my wrist, I thought she was about to say something kind, but instead, she dismantled my entire life in a single breath. "You're not my son. I stole you. Your real father is a billionaire, even now." Those words echo like a broken record. Dennis's rage, Marlene's disgust, the way the security guard escorted me out, it all blurs together. But one memory stands out. The rain, pouring down on the hospital steps, cold and relentless, soaking through my clothes as I realized I had no one. 3 months later, when Blackstone and Coral found me in that shelter line, I thought it was a cruel joke. But when they showed me the DNA report, when I saw my real name printed in black and white, something inside me cracked open. Christopher Sterling Rothwell. 3. Heir to billions. Son of a dying man I'd never met and the nephew of the woman who'd stolen me to ruin. Him I looked down at my calloused hands, the hands of a warehouse worker, not a billionaire's son, and for the first time, I didn't know who I was at all. Was I Nathan, the man raised in poverty and lies? Or Christopher, the missing child of wealth and privilege? And if I was both, then who was I really? The rain hasn't stopped since. Maybe it never will, because some storms don't fall from the sky. They live inside you, and mine had only just begun. It's strange, isn't it? How a single sentence can end your entire life. One moment you think you know who you are, the next, everything you've built, every memory, every bond, turns to ash. That's what happened to me. My name, or at least the name I thought was mine, was Nathan Bridgewater. For 38 years I lived under that name. Son of Dorothy and Harold Bridgewater, brother to Dennis and Marlene. The one who worked overtime to keep the lights on. The one who sent money home every month when the factory closed and things got tough, but that was before the lie. Before the moment my entire world fell apart, in the cold gray light of a hospital parking lot. You think you belong here? You think you have any right to anything of ours? That was Dennis, my brother, or the man I thought was my brother, shoving me ahead of him while Marlene followed, scrolling on her phone with that familiar look of disgust. Dorothy Bridgewater, my mother, had just died, and I'd spent every cent I had to help cover her funeral costs. I thought we'd be grieving together. I thought blood meant something. I was wrong. It says here, Marlene muttered, reading from her phone. Sterling Rothwell never stopped looking. He spent millions trying to find his son. There's a whole foundation dedicated to it. She looked up at me like she'd just seen something rotten crawl out from under the porch. While we were eating mac and cheese 4 nights a week, she sneered, your real daddy was living in a penthouse. Her words hit me harder than any punch. I barely had time to process before Dennis reached into my jacket and pulled out my wallet. This money was for Mom's funeral, I said, grabbing for it. Mom? He laughed, that cruel grin I'd seen 1,000 times. She wasn't your mom, remember? Consider this payment for all those years of freeloading. He pocketed the $300, everything I had left. Then he tossed my empty wallet into the mud. Dennis, I said, voice breaking. Marlene, please. Where am I supposed to go? Not our problem, Marlene snapped. She was already dialing her phone. I caught bits and pieces of what she said, my name, my address, something about fraud. Yeah, she told whoever was on the line. He's been living under false pretenses. The real Nathan Bridgewater probably died years ago. This guy's some kidnapped rich kid. By the time security arrived, my knees were trembling. Dennis stood tall, smirking, playing the victim. This man's been harassing us, he said, his voice smooth as oil. Check the records. Dorothy Bridgewater had 2 children, Dennis and Marlene. This guy, he's a stranger. Been perpetrating a fraud for decades. They didn't even hesitate. 2 guards grabbed my arms and escorted me out. I tried to go to my car, but Dennis held up my keys like a prize. You've been driving Harold's truck, he said coldly. Harold Bridgewater was my father, not yours. The truck stays with family. The doors slammed shut behind him. I stood there, in the freezing air, rain pelting down, watching the only home I'd ever known crumble into dust. I walked 4 miles back to my apartment. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every memory replayed with new meaning. Dorothy's guilty looks, the way she'd flinch when I asked about my baby photos, how she always said they couldn't afford film. It all made sense now. When I reached my building, my landlord was waiting at my door with a locksmith, Mr. Chen called, he said, not meeting my eyes. Mr. Chen was Dennis and Marlene's cousin, a lawyer. Said there's a question about your identity. Can't have someone living here under fraudulent pretenses. You've got 10 minutes to pack. 10 minutes to pack 38 years of a life that might have never been mine. I stuffed what I could into 2 garbage bags, a few shirts, a worn pair of jeans, Dorothy's photo, and my father's old watch. A watch that apparently didn't even belong to my father. By nightfall, I stood outside the Burke Lakefront homeless shelter, 2 bags at my feet, everything I owned inside them. My bank accounts were frozen. My name was under investigation. My family, gone. Nathan Bridgewater was dead, and maybe he'd never existed at all. The newspapers called it a tragedy decades ago. The disappearance of Christopher Rothwell, the son of billionaire philanthropist Sterling Rothwell. Kidnapped at age 3, never found, and now people whispered, maybe I was him. But I didn't feel like a Rothwell. I didn't feel like anyone. I was just a man caught between two ghosts, the boy who vanished and the man who never existed. 3 months at Burke Lakefront taught me one thing. Rock Bottom has a basement. And that basement? It has a subfloor no one talks about. Days blurred together. The stink of unwashed clothes, the sound of coughing through the night, the faint buzz of the neon sign outside the shelter window. I went from warehouse supervisor to day laborer, moved furniture for cash, cleaned foreclosed homes, anything that didn't ask for a last name. My hands, once soft from paperwork, split and bled from cold and effort. I learned which convenience stores threw away edible food, which churches served meals without sermons, which alleys to avoid after dark. Life shrinks fast when you lose your name. Thursday afternoon started like any other. The shelter's food line stretched halfway down the hall. I stood there, tray in hand, a scratched, cloudy piece of plastic that had been washed so many times it never looked clean. The man in front of me argued about portion sizes. The woman behind me smelled like cheap vodka and regret. I kept my head down. Invisibility was survival. Then, a voice cut through the noise. Nathan Bridgewater. I froze. 2 men stood beside me. Suits so crisp, they looked like they'd stepped out of another world. Every head in line turned. Men like that didn't come here. Not unless someone had died or someone was being arrested. The older one stepped forward, flashing a business card. Roger Blackstone, private investigator. His voice was calm, deliberate. The kind of voice used to being listened to. This is Anthony Corville, estate attorney. I blinked. If this is about Dennis claiming I owe him money, I don't have anything left to take. It's not about Dennis, Corville said quietly. It's about your father. Your biological father, Sterling Rothwell. The name hit me like ice water down my spine. I hadn't heard that name in months, but it had followed me everywhere in whispers, in rumors, in the pitying eyes of strangers, the missing Rothwell boy. I wanted to laugh, to tell them they had the wrong man, but something in their faces stopped me. We've been looking for you for 3 months, Blackstone continued. We ran DNA against the Rothwell family registry. The match was conclusive. 99.9%. My knees felt weak. The tray slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. I was the missing child. The one who vanished from a gated estate 35 years ago, Dorothy Bridgewater, had been my kidnapper. The woman I called Mom. The woman whose hand I held as she died. They led me outside into the blinding gray light, the city's noise crashing around me. For the first time in months, I wasn't invisible. But I'd never felt smaller, Mr. Rothwell, Corville said, and the name made me flinch. Your father's been looking for you his entire life. There's a private jet waiting to take you to Manhattan. I don't understand, I whispered. He's still alive? Blackstone nodded. And very eager to meet you. On the flight, they handed me documents, photos, newspaper clippings. My own face, a child's face, stared back at me from headlines. I'd never seen heir to Rothwell fortune still missing. Billionaire's son vanishes. Without a trace. There were pictures of a smiling toddler in a sailor outfit, standing beside a tall man with silver hair and tired eyes. My father, Sterling Rothwell. A man who had spent millions searching for the boy who disappeared. A man whose obsession had consumed him for decades. And now, that boy was sitting in a plane seat, dirty, hollow-eyed, wearing a shelter wristband. When we landed, everything felt unreal. The city lights, the polished marble floors, the scent of cologne and power in the air. I was escorted into a limousine that probably cost more than the house I grew up in. Reporters swarmed outside the gates of a towering glass building, the Rothwell Foundation. I caught glimpses of signs. Welcome home, Christopher. My name. A name that belonged to a ghost. Inside, the silence was unbearable. I followed Corville through endless corridors until we reached a heavy oak door. He opened it slowly. Sterling Rothwell sat by the window, older now, frail, but his eyes, sharp, alive, fixed on me like a man seeing sunlight after decades underground. "Christopher," he said. His voice trembled. "My son." The word son burned through me like fire and ice all at once. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted to believe, but I didn't know how. He stood, shaky but determined, and took a step toward me. "I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered. "They told me you were gone, but I never stopped looking." He reached out a trembling hand, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was supposed to be, the son of a billionaire, the child of a woman who wasn't my mother, the man who'd lost everything because of a truth he never asked for. Reporters would later call it a miracle reunion. They'd show photos of the two of us, the long-lost heir and the grieving father. But what they couldn't capture were the cracks underneath, the doubts, the guilt, the unspoken question burning in my chest. If Dorothy had really stolen me, why did she love me so fiercely? And why, even now, did part of me wish I could go back? Back to the lie. Back to the small house, the mac and cheese, the cheap birthdays and late-night laughter. Back to being Nathan Bridgewater, the man I used to be. But life doesn't rewind. It only unravels. And as Sterling Rothwell's hand finally touched mine, the truth felt heavier than any lie I'd ever carried. Because sometimes, finding out who you really are means losing everything that ever made you feel human. That night, as I stood by the window of the penthouse I'd supposedly been born into, I looked out at the city lights and realized something terrifying. I had gone from invisible to untouchable, but I didn't belong in either world. Nathan Bridgewater was gone. Christopher. Rothwell was a stranger, and somewhere in between them was me, a man with no name, no past, and no idea what waited next. Because every truth comes with a price, and mine had only just begun to collect. Imagine standing in a crowded shelter line, just another face in the blur of forgotten souls, when a stranger calls your name. Not the one you were born with, but the one you used to be. That's how my second life began. I set the tray down before I dropped it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The voice that had sliced through the noise belonged to a man in a dark suit, too sharp, too clean for this place. He held up a clear evidence bag, and inside it was a coffee cup. "My coffee cup.DNA sample," he said, "from the cup you threw away yesterday at the convenience store on Oakland Avenue." His tone was calm, but every word hit like a hammer. "We've been checking shelters, hospitals, churches," he continued. "Your mother's confession made the local news. Small item buried on page 6, but Sterling has people who watch for any mention of the kidnapping." My throat went dry. I hadn't heard that name in years. Sterling Rothwell, the billionaire whose son vanished almost 4 decades ago. The man beside him, older, calm, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, spoke next. "Come with us, Mr. Bridgewater. There's a conference room at the Marriott downtown. We need to talk privately." I glanced down at myself, worn jeans, thrift store coat, sleeves stained with grease. I wasn't exactly dressed for a hotel with marble floors and room service. "I'm not exactly Marriott material," I muttered. The first man's eyes softened just slightly. "Mr. Rothwell," he said, and hearing that name attached to me felt like being struck by lightning. You could be wearing a garbage bag and you'd still be Sterling Rothwell's son. The conference room on the top floor overlooked Lake Erie. Floor-to-ceiling glass, polished wood, a world I didn't belong in. The man in the gray suit opened a leather briefcase and began laying out documents like cards in a deadly game of truth. Birth certificates, DNA results, photographs that made my hands tremble, a baby with green eyes. My eyes, a woman with auburn hair holding him close, a man with the same jawline I saw every time I looked in the mirror. The older man, Blackstone, spoke quietly. "Your father is Sterling Rothwell, owner of Rothwell Real Estate Holdings, 43 commercial properties across Manhattan, including 2 entire blocks in Midtown. The portfolio is valued at $2.4 billion. I just stared at the papers, each one peeling away the skin of the life I thought was mine. The other man, Corville, slid another photo forward. "Your mother was Patricia Rothwell, née Morrison. She died in a car accident in 1988. Your father never remarried, never had other children. He said losing you both broke something in him that couldn't be fixed. My voice cracked. Dorothy Bridgewater, she... Blackstone's eyes met mine. She worked as a housekeeper for the Rothwell family in 1985. She'd been told she couldn't have children after multiple miscarriages. On the night of October 15th, during a charity gala at the estate, she took you from your nursery, I blinked. My ears rang. She'd planned it for months, he continued. Fake documents. A car ready. She drove straight to Ohio to a cousin who helped her create a new identity. Your father never believed you were dead. The FBI gave up. The police gave up. But Sterling, he never stopped looking. Corville added softly. He spent $12 million over the years hiring private investigators. Every lead, every whisper. Until now. Why now? I managed to ask. Why find me now when no one else could? Blackstone's answer was simple. Dorothy's deathbed confession. One of our analysts monitors news feeds for keywords related to the case. When her name came up, connected to a confession about a stolen baby in 1985, we investigated immediately. Your DNA confirmed it. Corville's tone softened. Your father's dying, Christopher. Liver cancer. Stage 4? The doctors give him 2 weeks at most. He wants to see his son before he goes. My heart twisted at the name, Christopher. My real name. Corville placed one last document on the table. A thick binder, heavy as stone. This is his will. You're the sole beneficiary. Everything goes to Christopher Sterling Rothwell. That's you, I shook my head. I don't know anything about real estate. I supervised a warehouse. I've been homeless for 3 months. You have the wrong person. Blackstone didn't even blink. We have exactly the right person. But there's something else you need to know about Dorothy Bridgewater. Something that explains everything. The private jet touched down at Teterboro just as the sun bled gold over Manhattan's skyline. Through the oval window, the city looked like a kingdom carved from light and steel. The empire my so-called father had built. Blackstone had bought me a suit from the hotel boutique. Navy blue, tailored, clean. It felt strange on me, like borrowed skin. A homeless man dressed for a funeral. When the car pulled up to the Fifth Avenue penthouse, my stomach twisted. 2 entire floors overlooking Central Park. Marble foyer, gold accents, chandeliers big enough to bankrupt small countries. A nurse in white scrubs met us at the door. He's been asking for you every hour, she said softly. He's lucid, but we don't know for how long. The study had been transformed into a hospital suite. Machines hummed softly. Outside, the city glittered like a sea of stars. Sterling Rothwell lay in the center of it all, frail, shrunken, but his presence still filled the room like a storm. His eyes, piercing, intelligent, found me instantly. Christopher, he whispered. Tears welled in his hollowed cheeks. You have Patricia's eyes. I've seen them in my dreams for 38 years. I froze in the doorway. I didn't know whether to call him sir or dad. He solved it for me, reaching out, his skeletal hand trembling. Let me look at you, he said. My son, my boy. They told me you were dead. But I knew. A father knows. The nurse stepped aside and I moved closer. His grip was weak but determined, as though letting go would make me vanish again. We talked for an hour. He asked about my life, wincing at every mention of struggle, poverty, the cruelty of Dennis and Marlene. I failed you, he said again and again. I was supposed to protect you. You couldn't have known, I told him. Dorothy fooled everyone. That name, Dorothy, darkened his expression. His jaw tightened. Tell him, he said to Blackstone. He needs to know everything. Blackstone hesitated, then opened another folder, the one he'd kept aside since Cleveland. When we looked into Dorothy's past, he said carefully, we found something unexpected. Her maiden name wasn't Wilson, as she claimed. It was Rothwell. The heir left the room. Sterling's face broke. She was my sister, he said hoarsely. My half-sister, actually. My father's shame, Blackstone explained. Sterling's father, your grandfather, had an affair with a housekeeper in 1955. Dorothy was the result. The family paid the woman to disappear, to never contact them again. But when Dorothy's mother died, Dorothy learned the truth. She came looking for money when she turned 18. The patriarch gave her $50,000 to go away and made her sign papers promising never to contact the family again. Sterling's voice cracked. But she wanted more than money. She wanted to be a Rothwell. So she came back under a false name. Got hired as a housekeeper in my home. Watched Patricia and me, watch the life she believed should have been hers. Corville added grimly, she worked there for 2 years pretending, waiting, planning. Blackstone opened a small leather-bound journal. We found this in her apartment in Cleveland. Her handwriting, angry, obsessive. He turned to a marked page and began to read. Sterling has everything because he was born on the right side of the sheets. His son will inherit billions while my children get nothing. But if I take the boy, raise him as my own, he'll still get everything eventually, just through me. I'll be his mother. I'll be the one he loves. The money will come to my family where it belongs. Sterling closed his eyes. She didn't just steal my son, he whispered. She stole him from her own brother. She raised you as her own, knowing every day that she was keeping my greatest treasure from me. My mind reeled. Dennis and Marlene. Were they? Her husband Harold's children from a previous marriage, Blackstone confirmed. Dorothy couldn't have children of her own. She married Harold to build a cover, a ready-made family to hide you in. Sterling's breathing grew shallow. The nurse moved toward him, but he waved her off. 2 more things, he gasped. First, I've already signed everything over to you. As of this moment, you're worth $2.4 billion. The room went silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. I stared at him. This man I'd just met, calling me his son, handing me the world like an apology. But beneath the shock, something else began to rise. A quiet, crawling dread, because if Dorothy had lied about everything, if she'd spent her life rewriting history, then maybe this story wasn't finished. Maybe the truth was still hiding somewhere, deeper. Sterling's grip tightened weakly around my wrist. And second, he whispered, his voice breaking, there's something else you must know. Something she left behind that changes everything we thought we understood. He struggled for breath. The nurse reached for the oxygen mask, but Sterling's eyes were locked on mine, burning with a final urgency. Find it, he rasped. Before they do! The machines began to scream. The nurse called his name, but all I could hear was that last word echoing through my skull. They. Who were they? And what had Dorothy left behind that was worth dying for? Because whatever it was, it hadn't stayed buried. Not forever, and I was about to find out why. Imagine being told that the woman who raised you wasn't your mother. That the life you lived was built on a crime so deep it tore through generations, and that the man you thought you'd never meet was waiting for you on his deathbed, whispering your real name. That was my reality. When my father, Sterling Rothwell, pulled me close that night, I could smell the medicine and the quiet weight of mortality in the room. His voice, frail but urgent, cracked through the silence. Dorothy wrote something else, he whispered. In that journal, she said there were others, other housekeepers, other stolen children. She was part of something bigger. Find them, Christopher. Find them, and bring them home. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. 2 weeks later, I stood beside his casket, surrounded by New York's elite. Men in tailored suits, women wrapped in diamonds, the heirs of skyscrapers and legacies built from ambition and ruthlessness. And there I was, once a homeless warehouse worker, now heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire I never asked for. I barely noticed when Dennis and Marlene walked in. Their cheap black suits hung off them like gilt. Their faces were pale, uncertain, rehearsed for sympathy. Brother? Dennis began awkwardly, trying to sound gentle. We were emotional when Mom died. It was shocking. My security team shifted, ready to remove them, but I lifted a hand. I'm not your brother, I said quietly. I never was. Dorothy made sure of that. Marlene's voice cracked, teetering between desperation and entitlement. You can't just leave us with nothing. We raised you. We're family. I looked her dead in the eye. You threw me out of a hospital when I had nowhere to go. You took my last $300 and called me a bastard. You remember what you said, Marlene? Good riddance. She didn't reply. They walked away in silence, swallowed by the glittering crowd. 6 months later, snow was falling over Manhattan. I stood in what used to be my father's office, the highest point of the Rothwell Tower, watching the city lights flicker beneath the storm. The leather chair behind his desk still smelled faintly of his cologne. Some days I caught myself turning toward it, ready to ask him something, before remembering he was gone. The skyline he built was now mine. My name, Christopher Sterling Rothwell III, engraved on 3 of those glass monoliths. And yet, in that vast kingdom of wealth, I felt more lost than ever. The first thing I did with the inheritance was something no one expected. I wrote 2 checks, $50,000 each, one to Dennis, one to Marlene. Corville, my father's old advisor, nearly choked. "They have no legal claim," he said. "They treated you terribly. Why give them anything?" I smiled faintly. "It's not about them. It's about me deciding who I want to be." Dennis cashed his within hours. Marlene mailed hers back, torn into confetti, stuffed into an envelope with a note. "I hope you choke on your billions." I had it framed. It hangs in my private bathroom. A reminder that money doesn't change people. It just amplifies who they already were. 6 months to the day after those 2 men in suits found me in a food line, I walked back into the Burke Lakefront shelter. Not as a resident this time, but as someone who could finally give back. I wore the same clothes I'd worn when I lived there. Same frayed jacket, same torn jeans. The only difference was the quiet envelope in my pocket. Mrs. Holstead, the shelter director, was behind the desk. The woman who used to slip me extra blankets when the nights got too cold, she froze when she saw me. "Nathan," she whispered, then caught herself. "I mean, Christopher, right? I heard about everything." "Nathan's fine," I said softly. "Nathan was the man you helped when he had nothing. Christopher's just the name on the checks." When she saw the amount, she broke down crying. $10 million, enough to keep the shelter running for decades. "We can expand," she sobbed. "Add mental health programs, job training." "Good," I told her, "because I'm going to need your help with something bigger." 3 months later, the Patricia Rothwell Foundation was born, named for the mother I never got to know. $100 million dedicated to one impossible mission, finding the other stolen children Dorothy's journals had hinted at. I made Blackstone, my father's old investigator, the foundation's director. At our first board meeting, he laid out the grim truth. Between 1980 and 1990, he said, 17 wealthy families reported kidnapped infants who were never found. In 12 of those cases, a housekeeper or nanny disappeared right after the abduction. He tapped the folder in front of him. Dorothy's journals mentioned 3 other women, Linda, Susan, and Marie. No last names. But we believe they were part of the same network. I leaned forward. Then we find them. 8 months later, we did. The first case was Michael Thompson from Detroit, only that wasn't his real name. DNA tests revealed he was actually Michael Pearson, heir to a pharmaceutical empire. His supposed mother, Linda, had died 5 years earlier, taking the secret with her. We arranged the reunion. I watched as a man in his 30s embraced a father who'd spent 35 years believing his son was dead. For a moment, it felt like redemption. The second case was harder. Susan had raised her daughter, Jennifer, in a small Kentucky town. They'd lived in poverty while Jennifer's real parents, wealthy philanthropists, searched the world for her. The reunion made national headlines. Jennifer hugged her biological mother through tears, caught between joy and betrayal, her entire sense of self shattering and reforming on live television. But it was the third case that broke me. Marie. She hadn't just stolen a baby. She'd stolen twins, separated them, sold one to a desperate couple in Canada, raised the other herself in Phoenix. When we found them, 29 years later, they lived just 300 miles apart. Each of them had felt it all their lives, that something was missing. A shadow of connection that had no name. When they finally met, it was like watching 2 mirrors finally face each other, one reflection finishing the other's sentence. I thought I'd seen everything by then, but nothing could prepare me for how that moment shattered me and healed me at the same time. A year after my father's death, Dennis tried to sue me, $50 million in emotional damages. Claimed Dorothy's deception caused him lifelong trauma. The judge didn't even let it reach trial. Case dismissed. After that, Dennis sent letters, half threats, half pleas. My lawyers stopped them before I ever saw most of them. Eventually, we got a restraining order. Marlene disappeared altogether. Word was she'd remarried in Florida, told everyone her brother had died years ago. I didn't bother to correct her. I still kept Dorothy's photo. The one I'd grabbed from my apartment the day everything changed. Not out of love, not even forgiveness, but as a reminder, she'd stolen me from my family. Stolen Sterling's chance to raise his son. Stolen my chance to know the mother whose name I only knew from news clippings, but she also, without meaning to, gave me something no amount of money could buy. Perspective. In trying to steal wealth, she made sure I grew up knowing what it meant to have nothing. That knowledge became my compass, every donation. Every investigation, every sleepless night spent reading through old police files, it all came from understanding both sides of the mirror, homeless and billionaire. Nobody and somebody. Nathan Bridgewater and Christopher Rothwell. Both true, both false, both me. Standing in that office one snowy night, looking out at the city that my father built and I inherited, I finally understood the truth. Dorothy never could. Family isn't about blood, or money, or the name printed on your birth certificate. It's about choosing. To love when it would be easier to hate. Choosing to rebuild when it would be easier to destroy. Choosing to search for truth even when lies are warmer, easier, safer. The Rothwell Foundation has found 43 stolen children so far, 43 families restored, 43 lives returned from the shadows. Some reunions are joyous, some are devastating. All of them are necessary. Each one a small correction to a decades-long injustice. Each one a piece of what Sterling started when he refused to stop searching. He looked for me for 38 years, and in the end, he found me just in time to say goodbye. Now, I search for others, hoping they'll get more time than we did. Sometimes I dream about Dorothy. In the dreams, I'm still a boy in that tiny Ohio kitchen, and she's at the sink washing dishes, humming softly. I ask her why she did it. Was it worth it? Did taking me fill that emptiness she carried all her life? Did raising her brother's son as her own give her the recognition she craved? She never answers. She just looks at me, eyes filled with guilt and exhaustion. And for a moment, I realize what she saw every day for 38 years. Not her stolen son, but her brother's face staring back at her. A living, breathing reminder of everything she'd destroyed. 7 words changed everything. Dorothy. Bridgewater was Sterling's biological sister. 7 words that exposed a lifetime of lies. That revealed how greed can twist love into obsession. That proved blood doesn't always make you family. Sometimes, it makes you a monster. My name is Christopher Sterling Rothwell III. Was stolen as a baby by my aunt, raised in poverty while my father searched the world for me and found me just in time to die in my arms. But I'm also Nathan Bridgewater, the man who worked in warehouses, slept in shelters, and held the hand of a dying woman who, for all her sins, still whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm both, and neither, rich and poor, found and lost." And maybe that's the point. The fortune Sterling left me doesn't belong to me, alone. It belongs to every stolen child still waiting to be found. Every parent who refuses to stop searching. Every family still trapped in the silence Dorothy helped create. I'm not the owner of that legacy. I'm its guardian. Somewhere in the spaces between what was stolen and what was found, maybe the 38, lost years finally start to mean something because the story didn't end with me being found. It's only just beginning, and out there, somewhere, someone else is still waiting to hear their real name.